White Warden, I'm Elmar. Serge Dedina, who's the chair of this committee, is sick, not COVID related, I understand, but he is sick and unable to attend. So I am filling in for him and calling to order the September 1 Shoreline Preservation Working Group meeting. Before we go around the room for welcome and introductions, I want to remind all voting working group members that item 7 will be a vote, which will require quorum throughout the entire meeting. So if you can, please stay the entire meeting. And if anybody has to leave where we're going to lose a quorum, let me know in advance, and we'll move that item up and make sure that we get a vote on it before we lose a quorum. All right, it's been ages since we've seen each other face to face. So let's go around the table and just say hello. And if you'd like to say a comment or two about you or your city, please do. Courtney, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Pesh, and I'm here from Sandag as a regional planner, too. And I'm excited that we're all here in person.
Ryan Keim, Oceanside City Council.
Joe Lugava from the city of San Diego, and I think this is my second year on this group. Welcome to be here.
Priyabat Patel, council member in the city of Carlsbad.
All right. Joy, how about you?
Hello, Joy Lyons, City of Encinitas. I'm the alternate for Kelly Hinsey, who's on maternity leave.
Mike?
Hi, everyone. Mike Donovan, from council member from City of Coronado. I'm also an alternate for Bill Sankey, who couldn't make it today.
Morning, everyone. My name's Eileen Maher. I'm with the Port of San Diego, and I'm an alternate for our chair, Dan Malcolm, this year.
Good morning, Jason Golumsky-Jones, Navy Region Southwest. I'm the Fleet Environmental Director, as well as the Regional Environmental Coordinator for the DoD in Region 9. With me today is my backup, who you will see more often, Ms. Jessica Curran.
Welcome to both of you. Keith, you guys want to introduce yourselves down there? All right, anybody else sitting out there that if you would like to introduce yourself, please do. You don't have to if you don't want to. Oh, I'm sorry, Marco?
Yeah, I'm Marco Gonzalez. I'm the executive director of the Coastal Environmental Rights Foundation, and I've been a member of the group, I think, pretty close to since inception.
Yeah, I think you're original equipment or close to it.
It's been a long time.
All right, anybody else that would care to introduce themselves? I'm not requiring you to if you don't want to. All right, let's move on. Let's begin with the non-agenda public comments. And let me ask Amelia, are there any non-agenda public comments that we need to take at this point? Oh my gosh, there we are.
Oops, sorry.
There is one hand raised.
All right, do we have any public comments, or is she still gearing up for it?
There are two hands raised for non-agenda public comments. The first person is James Peeler.
All right, James, welcome. You're on. If you can hear us, go ahead.
James Peeler, you can go ahead. We'll move on to Mike Hastings.
Mike, you're on. 3 minutes. Go ahead, please. If they're on the telephone, do they know how to push the *6 or whatever?
Hello, Mike Hastings here.
We got you, Mike. Go ahead.
And it's just more of a question and validation that I'll be able to comment as a member of the public on specific agenda items being present or presented today.
Yes, the answer is yes. You will be able to comment on agenda items as they come up.
Then I'm good to go. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. And the first speaker, James, were we able to connect with him?
He's the one that just spoke, Chair. The hand for James Peeler is still up. James, you can go ahead and speak.
Going once, going twice. James, I'm not sure if he's unable to connect or if he's disconnected. But Amelia, if he should figure it out and come on, let me know and we'll back up. And
he just put his hand down, Chair.
Okay, thank you, James. All right, moving on then. Now this is the time for comments from the working group. Do we have any members who would like to make a comment about something relevant to the subject matter of our committee? Anybody? Just shoot your real hand up. Not seeing any?
Mr. Warden?
Yes, I'm sorry.
We are going to, at a certain point, want to, is now the best time? Okay. I'm happy to report Oceanside has a new coastal zone administrator. So Jamie Timberlake is joining us virtually with an update on our project, a brief update on where we're at and where we're going.
Thanks for sharing that. I believe she was with Encinitas, and she's quite good as my
Correct, yes.
impression.
She has a quick presentation, if you don't mind, during
Yeah.
comments.
All right. Jamie, if you are on the magic internet machine, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you to Deputy Mayor Keim, and thank you to the working group for having me today. As you know, my name is Jamie Timberlake, and I'm the newly appointed Coastal Zone Administrator for the City of Oceanside. This position is the first of its kind in Oceanside and was created out of the recognition that shoreline maintenance is a priority to preserve and adapt to increasing coastal stressors from climate change and sea level rise. My role is to organize the city's ongoing coastal management efforts, as well as explore new methods of building coastal resiliency. Given the severity of the erosion on our city beaches, Oceanside is pursuing a myriad of projects concurrently that have the potential to restore sandy beaches while adding to our region's littoral self. And I'm here to provide this group with a brief update on our concurrent efforts. So the first effort is our renewed participation in the Army Corps of Engineers program. In January this year, Congressman Levin was able to secure federal funds to further a study that will discern a remedy for the severe erosion caused by the Camp Pendleton boat basin. We are very grateful for the Army Corps and Congressman Levin's efforts thus far, and we are striving to be a helpful partner. However, the timeline of the study's results is 44 months from start to finish, which is an unworkable timeline given the severity of erosion and continued beach loss year after year. We remain hopeful that the study will generate a preferred project by its due date of 2026, and that it will provide the federal government with a path forward to remedy the erosion. But we are also cautious to be 100% reliant on the Army Corps, since this effort has restarted several times since originally authorized by Congress in 2000. So our second effort to get some more sand to our beaches and into the littoral cell is to renew the city's scoop program. We are renewing our suite of scoop permits, or the opportunistic sand grab and placement permits. We have permits from the Coastal Commission and from the Regional Board, and we expect to get our last permit from the Army Corps Regulatory this month. The program will enable us to place up to 150,000 cubic yards of opportunistic sand on city beaches on an annual basis, should clean sources of sand become available from other projects. And the third concurrent effort is one that we know the region is very interested in and has potential concerns about, and it's the next phase of our sand retention pilot project. The city has heard the region's concerns about retention and downcoast erosion. The first task of our pilot project will be to locate a local sand source or decipher a method of consistent sand delivery from around the Camp Pendleton boat basin. We are confident we can mitigate any downtrip impacts, as our pilot project plans to bring an influx of new sand into the littoral cell with management triggers that are supported by a robust monitoring program. Aside from retention concerns, we have heard interest from other jurisdictions and the state in the need to try to retain sand with a more innovative or nature-based approach, such as with an artificial reef or artificial headland. The city is eager to test a novel multi-benefit solution that our public beaches will benefit from and that the region and state can learn from. We're seeking supportive action from the region, including being active participants in deciding on which innovative solution to test, And we are exploring some creative ideas on how to invite innovation and collaboration into the design process. And finally, we plan to participate in the Regional Beach Sand Project 3 Feasibility Study. The city is very encouraged by this and excited about the reboot of this program. So I hope this paints the holistic sediment management approach that we're taking in Oceanside. Given the dire condition of our beaches and what's at stake with sea level rise, we feel that these concurrent efforts are absolutely necessary. I'm available to answer questions and meet with the working group members or dedicated staff to provide more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And before I see if anybody has any questions, just a thank you to you and Deputy Mayor Kime. This is the right way to do it, to give regular reports and updates and collaborate with all of us. So we really appreciate that and hope that you will do this on a regular basis. Is there anybody that does have a question that they would like to ask Jamie at this point? No, okay, then keep us in the loop. This is, of course, an important project, and we are all very interested in seeing it succeed in a way that works for the region. Anybody else on the working group have a comment they want to make at this point? If not, now let's move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is the approval of the meeting minutes from the May 5th, 2022 meeting. And hopefully you all have a memory that goes back that far. I don't, so I looked at them and read them. Does anybody have a comment on the minutes or see a problem with them? If not, let's have a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move approval.
All right,
Second.
and a second, was that you, Dr. Bhat Patel, second?
Yeah.
All right, moved and second to adopt the minutes. Any discussion? Not seeing any, then please vote. And although we have this fancy voting machine today, we're just using our hands. So if you're a yes, put your hand up and hold it up long enough that whoever's doing the counting can do the counting. We got them? All right, thank you all for that. All right, let me see where we are here now. Actually, I should have asked if there were any public comments on the minutes, but so Amelia, were there? I'm hoping not, since I skipped over it. But if there were, we can go back.
We don't have any comments for this item, Chair.
All right, thank you. Then,
And for the record, the previous item did not have also any hands raised for public comments.
all right, thank you for that, Amelia. All right, the next item is reports. And first up is agenda item number 4. This is the Shoreline Preservation Working Group Charter, Membership and Work Plan. And we're going to ask Keith Greer to enlighten us on that. Keith, take it away.
It's been a long time since we've done a face-to-face meeting. It's good to see everyone. For those of you who don't recognize me after all these months, my name's Keith Greer. I'm one of the planning managers here at Sandag, and I'm in charge of our environmental programs. And the shoreline preservation work we do falls under that program itself. So item 4 is an informational update on the Shoreline Preservation Working Group Charter and a discussion item on the proposed work plan for fiscal year 23. So you may recall that we've had a discussion about the larger Sandag efforts to be becoming more effective working groups that better aligns with agencies' priorities and providing more input into Sandag's decision-making process. This came as part of a larger look at our processes and trying to streamline our processes while creating more meaningful meetings for you. Part of this effort was to reduce the number of working groups and shift more towards task force. Task force are non-Brown Act entities. They help guide specific projects such as the Bay Shore Bikeway or other kind of specific projects, or surrounding narrow topics such as goods movement or digital divide, something like that. So we had a discussion about possibly moving the Shoreline Preservation Working Group to a task force, and I gave updates in March and May to your group. Hearing some feedback here. But since the Shoreline Preservation Working Group is made up of so many elected officials, our legal counsel had said that they should remain a Brown Act working group. So there's no change for your working group in regards to the makeup. The executive committee at the Sandag Executive Committee at its July meeting, they adopted an updated charter for your working group, which reflects the same charter we provided to you in May and includes some of the comments you've already previously made. The alignment and the membership hasn't changed. It's also shown in your attachments there. And the charter is in alignment with what was presented to you already in May and includes comments made at that meeting. So to make more effective meetings and to make strategically address topics of concern for Sandag and for the working group members, all working groups will create a work plan. So included in your agenda package is the work plan for fiscal year 23. It includes tentative topics by quarters, which we propose to bring to this working group and have a discussion on. We think we've done a good job identifying the topics and have come up with, based upon past discussions by this group, that are still pertinent. But we'd like the working group's input. We want to make sure there's all that's comprehensive, and we included things that you know of that we may not know of. So with that, I'd like to turn the item back over to the chair to have a discussion about this item. Again, it's no action required. We're just looking for input on the work plan itself.
All right, thank you very much for that, Keith. Any working group members have a question for Keith or a comment on the work plan at this point? Yes.
Hi, how difficult will it be to add something to the work plan as we discover something, say, in March or December?
It's very flexible. We can add things on the agenda. We can agendize them for next month or whenever we meet again, or just add it for a future item. So it's a roadmap. It's not necessarily the strict rules.
Good.
Good question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I love this idea of a regional scoop permit. Construction at the Hotel Del gave us an opportunity for some sand on our beaches that the Coastal Commission had some problems with in terms of some activities on the beach that we were participating in as far as grooming and cleaning up kelp. They want us to change that procedure and do away with it in order to get the opportunistic sand. It was a shame because it was right there. And a regional approach to that kind of scoop project might be really appreciative and benefit for a lot of regions. My question involves the work plan. Most of the work that I've done on this committee in the years I've been on it has related to the ocean shore, from Oceanside to IB. Is there any part of the work plan that incorporates the shoreline of San Diego Bay in the focus of this group?
Absolutely. So the shoreline members are also, the coastal jurisdictions are included on this working group, as well as the bayfront members. So Imperial Beach and Chula Vista, National City. So we can also add anything related to the bayfront, and we have done in the past.
Thank you. One of the things that comes to mind is the port's effort for living shoreline all the way around, and also other opportunities for soft shoring. The oyster beds down in Chula Vista come to mind. So I think keeping the committee appraised of the activities in the bay would be a good idea for everybody to be aware of what's going on, and support for those projects would be appreciated, as well as everything that happens on the ocean. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Mr. LaCava.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that in the narrative you mentioned sea level rise. Is there any, does that fit into any of the bullet points identified below, and also coastal bluff erosion?
So several bullet points below. So the state of the science, we should be talking about sea level rise in terms of the latest science. It fits under policy in terms of what the California Coastal Commission and other policy entities are coming up with, and then including adaptation projects, which we may have around the region. For example, we brought the living shoreline in Encinitas to this group in the past. So we propose to do that in the future and to bring policy, science, and projects to your group.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that. And I believe, Keith, we've done at least 2 field trips, right? One was to the Cardiff Living Dune Field, and one was to Imperial Beach to see various things, correct?
That's correct. We had proposed today's meeting to be remote, or to be actually in the field at Solana Beach, but back and forth with COVID didn't happen for us. So we propose to have your December meeting actually in Solana Beach to take a look at that area that's proposed to have sand as part of the Encinitas in Solana Beach, which you'll hear more about in item 7 today.
Great. Yeah, I think those field trips are very valuable to actually, for all of us to actually see what's happening in the field. So any other working group member comments or questions at this point? If not, let me ask Amelia if we have any public comment on this item.
There are no hands raised on this comment, on this item, Chair.
All right, then this is not an action item. It was just information. So I think we're done, Keith, unless you tell me something else. Okay, then let's move on to the next item is agenda item 5, potential regional beach sand project 3 update. Over the summer, Sandag staff met with a shoreline protection working group members and city staff to gauge the interest in executing another regional beach sand effort, with coastal jurisdictions providing matching funds for phase 1 of what would be RBSP 3. And that would be feasibility and economic analysis study. Staff will be providing an update on the overall consensus based on those meetings. And I think this is you again, Keith.
It is, Chair. Thank you. So I'm excited about M5. This is about the possibility of doing another regional beach sand project, or as we've been calling it, RBSP3. So over the last year, we've seen a renewed interest in pursuing one of these beach nourishment projects that look across the whole region. Now, we've had the city of Oceanside give presentations of some of the work they're doing. And in the future, we'll have, very shortly, we'll have Solana Beach talk about the work that they're in Encinitas are also working on. So you recall that in 2001 and 2012, we've had regional beach sand projects 1 and 2. Sandag led that effort on behalf of the coastal cities, and they were both very successful. But it's been over a decade now, and it's time to start talking about another regional beach sand project. So in March, we had Sandag's PM, Shelby Tucker, who was a PM for Regional Beach Sand 2, come and talk to you about the funding for how they got the Regional Beach Sand 2 off the ground and some of the lessons learned. And then in May, I came and presented a roadmap for you for what another regional beach sand project could look like. And if there's a slide, you could advance the slide. If we have a slide on this. One back. It should be a roadmap picture. If not, I'll just talk to it. So in that itself, in May, I presented that there would be 3 phases to any regional beach sand project. The first phase is a planning study, which includes the necessary feasibility and economic analysis that would be required. The second phase is actually moving the project over into engineering and permitting. And the third and final phase is construction and post-construction monitoring. The total for all 3 of those phases, we estimate in today's dollars, with the inflation that's occurred, to be about $37 million, with the first phase being about $200,000 worth of work. So let's talk about funding for a second. Over the last 3 years, Sandag has applied for 3 grants related to funding that $200,000 of initial planning level work. And we've gotten feedback. We've been unsuccessful in the awards of those grants. And we've gotten feedback from the granting agencies indicating that this type of planning level work is not really competitive. So as disappointing as that is, we went back and looked at the Regional Beach Sand 1 and 2 projects and realized that those both projects, that same issue occurred with their planning level analysis. And what they did is the jurisdictions banded together and they came together and said, we'll fund the first phase of that work, the initial feasibility and economic analysis, so that we can attract grant funding for the phase 2 and 3. And they were very successful for 1 and 2, and we believe that also could happen here with Regional Beach Sand 3 project. So in May, we presented to you the roadmap and what it would take to fund the $200,000 worth of work. We recommended that the jurisdictions come together and pay for that work. And the working group at that time in May said, okay, we like the idea, we support it. Now go talk to the jurisdictions and see if they support it. So Courtney and I, over the summertime, we've met with all 8 jurisdictions, coastal jurisdictions, and we said, what's the willingness to enter into a memorandum of agreement, similar to what was done with Regional Beach Sand 2 projects, to pay their share of the feasibility study and economic analysis. So the upshot of all that is over the summer, we've all expressed their willingness and interest in a Regional Beach Sand 3 project. It makes sense for the region to continue this as a normal beach nourishment type of maintenance effort. But some jurisdictions express a varying level of optimism towards funding the work. And I think, that said, all jurisdictions agreed to take the proposal to their jurisdictions in the county this fall, but some had said, our sand needs are met. Solana Beach and Coronado specifically said, we don't know about funding this because our sand needs are met, but we think the region actually is a good idea to move forward with this. So what we did is we came back and said, okay, let's present this to the Shoreline Working Group. And another thing that came up was how we should fund that. Sandag proposed that we take the $200,000 and everybody pay an equal share of that. All jurisdictions that were interested should participate and pay an equal share. Several jurisdictions recommended that we consider, instead of doing that, to base it upon the miles of shoreline in that city. So more proportionate share. The more miles of shoreline you have, the more funding will be required for the phase 1. This was the method paid for costs for Regional Plan 1 and 2. And so you'll see here, let me have the next slide, please. This is also in your staff report, but depending on who jurisdictions that participate, you'll see a change in the funding levels. For example, we know the city of San Diego has lots of miles of shoreline. And so if they're in or out, it really changes the funding scenarios. So our attorneys have indicated that this can be done in the language of the MOU, that we don't have to figure this out today. We have something similar that has occurred with some of our other MOUs where the flexibility is built into the MOU to allow some of the accommodations if a jurisdiction decides to participate or not participate. So staff is recommending as we go forward now that we craft an updated MOU based upon the MOU that's in your current packet today. that we include phase one of the attached scope of work, which was presented in May to you, and that we indicate the cost sharing should be based upon the miles of city shoreline used. For the MOA should reflect that jurisdictions not participating in the phase one work would have to reimburse their share of the phase one work prior to obtaining any sand from this effort. So the idea there is if you don't participate now, you're gonna have to pay your fair share if you want sand in the future. And I thought that came up, that was a good idea that came up in the jurisdictions. So what's the next steps? So SANDAG is gonna prepare the updated MOA. We're gonna approach the jurisdictions for the necessary funding and submit it for their considerations for their councils this fall. Staff will report back to the Shoreline Preservation Working Group in December about this effort, and we have plans to start this work in the first of the calendar year. This is information item only. There's no action required, but I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Keith. Let's see, are there working group members that have questions about what we've just heard? Deputy Mayor Kime.
Keith, what's a realistic timeline if things go smoothly of when actual replenishment could start based on RSP 1 and 2? What's realistic?
So I can tell you about the first phase, because the second phase involves grants. So you're going to hear your next item, some of the possible grants from the state, which is how Regional Beach Sand 2 project came along. So let's be overly optimistic for a second. Let's say everything goes swimmingly. We're going to hear that if we put in for a grant with the state, it's going to take 18 months to get consideration of doing that grant project. And that'll come in the next item here from the state parks. So I think the thing is to make yourself as ready as possible. And that's what we're doing here with the Regional Beach Sand 1, phase 1, which is to get that level of work of the feasibility and economic analysis done. So when the money comes, and it will come, that we're ready and we're first in line. We just met yesterday on all these climate adaptation grants that are coming from the state, including $40 million per year for the next 5 years from the federal government, in which they're asking us which projects SANDAG has in line. So if we're ready, we're going to be more attractive to funding. It's just like infrastructure. The more shovel ready you are, the more you can attract funding. So that's what the item today is, to make us as ready as possible.
Yes.
Keith, I just wanted to thank you for your out-of-the-box thinking about how to move this forward, and I support what you're proposing as far as the MOA. And I just give you kind of kudos there, but also interested in this moving forward as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Other questions at this point from working group members? We'll have some chance for comment in a minute, but let's see. Amelia, are there any public on the line that wanted to comment or make a statement on this item?
Yeah, we do. We have 3 people with their hand up. We have Julia Chung, then Terry Gasterlund, and following is Mike Hastings.
All right, let's take Julia Chun here first, and welcome, Julia. She was for many years a member of this group. Julia, you're on.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thanks for having me. So yeah, Julia Chen here representing Coastal Consulting. And I just wanted to bring up the need for surf monitoring again. It's basically recommended that we have at least a minimum of 3 years of baseline information. So as you're beginning consideration of this important item, I would encourage you to include baseline monitoring of your surf conditions and use conditions. There are passive ways of doing that, such as was done by Surfrider back in 2012 following the last project. There are other ways as well. I do believe it will make your permitting easier if it's planned into the project and given a lot of forethought. So my encouragement is to start early. Happy to provide input if you want to go down that path based on our experience last time. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up for its consideration early and often.
Thank you, Julia. And let me just ask Keith, if you know, can you give us a quick summary on what kind of surf monitoring was done last time?
Yes, so this item is actually going to be brought to your December meeting of the working group. We actually have a surf monitoring that Doug Gibson from the San Diego Lagoon has done for the Encinitas dredge, where they took out the sand out of Encinitas, San Diego Lagoon and put it on the beach. And so he'll give you a presentation on that in December.
All right, great. Thank you, Julia. Did you have anything else?
That's it for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Julia. And I've already forgotten who the second person was, but Amelia, if you remind me. And
Yeah, that would be Terry Gasterlund.
all right, you are welcome, Jerry. You're on. Or I'm sorry, that's Terry Gasterlund. I should know that. She's my colleague. Welcome, Terry.
Hi, it's great to be able to participate remotely. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. So excellent presentation. This is an exciting project. Del Mar, I notice, is listed as having 3 miles of beach, and that 3 miles includes the San Diego River mouth, which is quite wide, and Torrey Pines State Beach. And I'm wondering, with Cardiff State Beach, and I believe there's State Beach in Carlsbad as well, ought we be asking for some state beach related funds, at least trying to work with the state beaches?
That's a very good question. Keith, would you like to comment on that? You can decline if you're not ready.
So the next speaker will be about the state grants, which we hope to get for the big chunk of the money, right? So last time the Regional Beach Stand 2 project went forward, 85% of that was paid for the state. So we can, one, be as ready as possible as a local region to attract that 85% match over here at the state funds. Or we can try to figure out how to work with the state and get grants, which may or may not come for this phase 1 in time. So I respectfully think that if we want to go fast, we take a local jurisdiction and we self-help, and we don't rely upon grants for this first phase. And then we go after the state to help us pay those really big dollar values in phase 2 and 3.
Great, thank you. I'll just note, I guess for the record, that Del Mar has 3 miles of beach and 1 mile of that is Torrey Pines State Beach. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Terry. Do you have anything else?
No, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question.
All right, then, Keith, I think it makes sense what you're saying. We want to be partners with the state. We're hoping to get major funding from them, but it may be that we're on our own to jumpstart things with this first phase and to get it going. All right, we have one more speaker on the line, I believe, Amelia.
Yes, that would be Mike Hastings. You can go ahead, please.
Mike, you're on.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay between the prompt to speak and actually unmuting. Before I ask my question, Mike Hastings, Executive Director, Los Panisquitos Lagoon Foundation. I'd like to personally thank Keith Greer and Sandag staff for working with my foundation to really protect it from a lot of ways, including setting up an endowment to keep our inlet open. So based on that and the partnerships, my question to you, Keith, is at what point will groups like mine be able to participate with Sandag and local municipalities to really look at the monitoring program, which in the case at Torrey Pines, the one that's used now is not set up to answer the questions of how the sand moves down the beach. It's actually set up to answer the questions of what contributions to coastal bluff erosion at southern Torrey Pines contribute to beach nourishment, set up by Doug Inman in the 80s. Since that time, I've worked with Haniawani and Coastal Environments to set up additional transects to the north, as well as pull grain size to get more data sets that we feel really help answer the questions of how sand moves south towards Los Pen Lagoon, as well as what quantities. And then kind of to dovetail off that is another item of interest groups like mine have is at some point we need to discuss what additional mitigation funds will be set aside to potentially pay for additional inlet openings that we have experienced down at Los Panisquitos in previous, following previous beach nourishment efforts. Essentially, we just want to be a part of the process, fine tune it a bit more as it's specific to Los Pen Lagoon based on the additional money we've invested for monitoring, and just work together to make sure that that the places get the sand that need it, but at the end of the day, we can keep the inlet open down at Los Pen. And I'll get a little more into detail as to why that's important on agenda item number 7. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Keith, would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, it's very appropriate to be involved now. I'm glad to see that both Julia and Mike are involved in giving comments today. The feasibility study is the place to insert that. And that's the first phase of the study. We pay for the feasibility study. We say not only what have we learned from the past projects, such as the surf monitoring, such as how inlets were affected, but also what are opportunities for us to make the process go faster and cheaper. And so that's already embedded into our scope of work for the first phase, which is the planning, feasibility, and economic analysis.
Thank you, Keith. Amelia, is there anybody else on the line? I'm double checking here.
Yes, Dennis Ritz is on the line. Go ahead.
Dennis, you're on. Welcome.
muted. Okay, I'm Dennis Ridds. I'm chair for the Torrey Pines Community Planning Board. I'm here to support Mike Hastings, who I've worked with for years. And I just want to say that we've had the issue with the lagoon closing because of sand, particularly the king tides. And it has raised the specter of having to actually spray insecticides in the lagoon because of the West Nile virus and other things. So this is both a health issue and certainly a financial burden on the groups we're dealing with. I also would say I'm supposed to be part of this subcommittee, but I cannot attend at least this point to my knee heels in person. So I hope you will consider doing more Zoom presentations to the board. But thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, and for all you do for the Torrey Pines Community Planning Group. And sorry to hear about your knee. Amelia, anybody else on the line?
We have one more, Brian Leslie.
Brian, you're on. Welcome.
Hi, and thank you for letting me speak today. I had a question for you, Keith. I was wondering whether any alternative delivery methods for RBSP3 have been considered, such as design build.
Do you know what he means by that, Keith?
Yeah, so we're talking about different kind of ways of constructing a project. There's different ways of doing it. Design build is one of the ways. That's like way down the line. And I think the feasibility study could get into that in terms of way to actually procure the services, whether you want to go through a design build or through another build design type of program. But that's kind of inside baseball way down the line, but we can try that.
Yep, thanks.
Anything else from you, Brian?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks for participating, and that's your invitation to stay engaged, because we will get that answer for you later. Anybody else on the line, Amelia?
We have no more hands raised for this item.
All right, then let's see if there's some further working group discussion based on what you've heard. This would be the time. Just raise your hand if you'd like to say anything. Deputy Mayor Kime.
I just want to reiterate our commitment to this project. Obviously, everyone in the working group has heard our issues in Oceanside and how severe the situation is. And as we do this, especially in the Oceanside littoral cell, north of San Diego, I think we're in this together, and the sand that's put in there is going to move from beach to beach and city to city. And I think it's important we do it as a team. There's going to be years where Oceanside has sand, Solana Beach, Encinitas, Del Mar might not. And you have my commitment that we'll be partners and help fund efforts then as well, so that we can just have a consistency year over year and make sure we have sand on the beaches. I think it's important to do it together consistently.
Thank you for saying that. And just in the interest of full disclosure, there were several of the local cities in the North Coastal area, including mine, that had adopted resolutions expressing concern, not necessarily flat opposition, but concern about the groin proposal. And so it's very reassuring to hear a bit of a difference in direction and more collaboration. And so that's all good. Anybody else want to raise an issue? Yes, sir.
Really appreciate those comments from Deputy Mayor Kime. Yeah, I just want to really second Deputy Mayor Kime's comments. I think it makes a lot of sense that Oceanside would get more sand if possible, because a lot of cities to the south all the way to the La Jolla Canyon would subsequently benefit from that sand as well. That's just kind of how it goes in that littoral cell. And then I had a question for Keith. Just curious, I know that the first two projects, the sand, I think all of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, came from the offshore collector sites. Is there studies, or do you just know offhand, like how much sand is available in those sites, and is there enough to keep doing this?
So we talked about the first phase being a feasibility study and economic analysis. The second part of that is to go to the borrow sites, as they're called, and look how much sand is available right now. So you can add that in. It's about another $250,000. It's expensive, and we're hoping to get state funding for that. But that's the next thing you look at, is where the sand is and how much can you use.
Thank you for that. Other comments at this point? Yes, Mr. LaCava.
Thank you, Chair. I think you mentioned this in your initial presentation, Keith, and thank you for that presentation. What is the timeline for the MOU? The city of San Diego doesn't often move as quickly as other smaller cities do. So in terms of getting that funding allocation.
So we hope in the next month to craft an updated MOA and then to share that with the various city staff and request that we get on an agenda in the upcoming meetings. So we're giving about 3 to 4 months to hopefully get on an agenda and then report back to here, where we're status in December.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith.
Anything else? I'm not seeing any hands. A couple of questions or comments for me. One, Keith, can you explain a little bit? There are these Army Corps of Engineer projects going on, Oceanside and then Encinitas, Solana Beach, that we're going to hear more about. And my understanding is those have separate funding tracks through the assistance of Congressman Levin, et cetera. And RBSP3 is separate. How do these intersect in terms of funding and in terms of is somebody going to tell us, well, you don't need RBSP3 because the Army Corps is doing this, or are they coordinated? How do they work together?
Okay, so that's the next step of all this. That's a great question. I don't want to steal Mr. Wade's thunder about the presentation he's going to make on the Encinitas and Solana Beach project. But the idea for me is for the Regional Beach Stand 3 project to build off of that. So we talked about ways of making this be done cheaper and faster. So is there a way to use the Army Corps of Engineers cycle that they're doing for Encinitas and Solana Beach and add to that the other jurisdictions? The idea is if their dredge is going to be down here anyways, why don't we do the other beaches? That's the idea. That's where the feasibility study will get into and say, here's the opportunities to align these better and to reduce the cost. So we haven't had discussions with the Corps yet, but that is exactly where we're headed with all that.
All right, great. A couple of other comments from me while people are chewing on what they might want to say. Number one, I support going forward with the MOA. I think that's the right way to do this. The model we used last time is good to follow. I think the miles of shoreline frontage is a fair way to do it. If the world were truly a fair place, however, every city in the county would be paying, and so would Los Angeles and Arizona and all the people who send people to our beaches and enjoy them. It's a bit of a burden to ask just the cities who happen to have shoreline to pay for the entire cost of this operation, at least phase one. So as an example, in my city, Del Mar, there are only 4,000 permanent residents, but we get 3 million visitors a year. So if the world were truly fair, there'd be a way to tap into that, but that is probably not likely. So that's just a bit of a comment or a whine from me, and I'll move on. And I do think that in the big picture, if we pony up and do this phase one, even though it's a bit unfair for us to carry all of that, that the phase two and phase three, which are much, much more expensive, will be cost spread through federal and state dollars, so there will be some equity to come back into the system. And that's all I had. Anybody? Yes, sir. Marco.
Yeah, a couple things to point out. Obviously, the difference between 2012 and 2022 is stark. Back in 2012, we were still trying to get people to believe that climate change was affecting our coast, and shoreline adaptation plans and policies around that were just finally starting to make their way into the common vernacular. Also, since then, the Coastal Commission policies regarding shoreline armoring have evolved. And one of the ways they've evolved is with a fairly robust discussion on mitigation, both for erosion and for recreation impacts. And some of that mitigation, that funding, should be sitting out there in a pot. And my question to Keith is that Coastal Commission mitigation fund available for some of this first phase work? Because it's not the type of money that's going to really put a dent in the future grant funding for actual construction phase, but for a couple $100,000, there should be that much money out there for our region.
So SANDAG, on behalf of the commission, established a fund to reserve all that, any kind of mitigation coming from local jurisdictions goes into that pot. And then it's requested to be used. This is what item 7 is about. They're requesting to use the money for some of the beach nourishment projects you're going to hear about. That funding is available for any jurisdiction that has funding in there. They can request to use it. So as part of the MOA that we're adopting, if they want to fund that through the beach recreation or beach impact funds, they can do that. And so we just have to hear a request from that, bring it to the board, and release the funds.
Good. So the only thing that I'd follow up on is a lot of what I recall from RBSP 1 and 2 is on the science side, the consideration of baseline. And obviously there's a science baseline, but there's also, I don't know, I'd call it kind of events and project baseline. So as we know, one of the more contentious issues regionally is retention. Obviously, when you get to funding discussions, the idea of spending tens of millions of dollars without corresponding strategies for retention comes up. And I think Oceanside provides a good example of kind of a microcosm of 30 years of discussion around retention. But we do have the living shoreline in Cardiff and Encinitas, and that is a new version of retention that didn't exist in 2012. And it's worth that being part of the baseline discussion when we're talking about soft strategies, if you will, for justifying the bigger expense of the RBSP3. But then another baseline issue, I think, coming out of Encinitas is the catastrophic collapse at Grandview that resulted in the death of 3 people. And not just the kind of the science side of what happened, why it happened, but the policy side of a lawsuit having been filed against numerous parties for inaction on coastal armoring. It provides kind of an interesting conundrum where you have the Coastal Act talking about when you can and can't armor. You have RBSP2 and some opportunistic sand projects putting sand up at Ponto and perhaps not having an impact on erosion at that site. But then we have kind of the long-term precedent of what happens if there is coastal jurisdiction liability for not taking action to address erosion or bluff stability. And I think that weighs heavily on whether coastal cities should be willing to pay for getting this jump started.
Thank you for that, Marco. Keith, you're welcome if you would like to respond, but not required. I would just note on the issue about the collapses and the liability exposure, Assemblymember Tasha Borner-Horvath sponsored a bill that passed, and Scripps has some research money, and they are doing a study to try to figure out, using inclinometers and various devices, if there is a way that we can predict in advance where a sea cliff is most likely to collapse so that preventative measures could be taken. And at some point, that would probably be a good presentation to this group to invite somebody from Scripps. I think they're just getting started, so they probably don't know much yet, but when they have something, that would be very interesting to know. Other working group comments on this topic, and no more public?
There are no hands raised on this item.
All right, then thank you all. This again is not an action item. This was just information, but RBSP3 is something that's going to be in all of our futures for the long term. And we're off to a good start, I think. And let me see, next, we are up to item 6, Division of Boating and Waterways, upcoming grant
Excuse
opportunities.
me, there is a hand now that is raised, and that would be Mayor Esther Sanchez, City of Oceanside.
All right. Mayor Sanchez, you are on and you are welcome.
My apologies, I just saw the button. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. What I wanted to see if we could address were potential delays, such as knowing that the barge is going to be coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, which is something that we periodically have problems with for our annual dredging. And if we could start urging for the presence of a barge on the West Coast.
Thank you for that. That's a very good suggestion. And in fact, some of us have talked about whether at some point we shouldn't look at buying our own dredging barge and housing it somewhere here on the West Coast. And it could be used by not only all our members, but the port and everybody else. Other than, I think Mayor Sanchez is right. A huge part of the expense and the timing of doing this is getting these dredging barges, which are typically off the East Coast. Or yes, Keith, did you want to comment?
So that's part of the feasibility study about ways of reducing the cost. Is about how you get a dredge out here cheaper. There's already a dredge in the West Coast for the Army Corps of Engineers project. And we're gonna have concessions with the other Southern California cities about this exact topic. So it's something that's percolating. We have it on top of our mind and we're gonna be pursuing it.
All right, Mayor Sanchez, thank you for dredging up that issue.
Thank you.
Can't help myself, sorry about that. All right, any more comments, Amelia? All right, then we're moving on to item number 6.
There are no hands raised.
Thank you.
Chair,
Item
is it
number 6.
possible? Chair, is it possible to switch for item number 7 next, so we don't lose quorum on that?
Yes, sure. Let's skip ahead then. Absent objection, we'll just reorder the agenda and skip to item 7. Item 7 is Encinitas Solana Beach Coastal Storm Damage Reduction Project. City of Solana Beach's city manager, Greg Wade, is here and will present an overview of the Army Corps of Engineers project as the first half of item 7. The second half of the presentation will be the City of Solana Beach asking the Shoreline Protection Working Group for a recommendation. Mr. Wade, welcome, and you are on.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Mayor Warden and members of the board, or the working group rather, sorry. It's really good to be here. My name is Greg Wade, City Manager of the City of Solana Beach, and I'm here on behalf of the cities of Encinitas and Solana Beach to give you an update and an overview on this project, and then to make the request of the sand mitigation funds that were actually just discussed. Moving on to the next slide. So this project has been in the works for some time. Obviously, the purpose and objective of before I start, let me also preface this by saying the Federal Army Corps Beach Replenishment Program, Shoreline Replenishment and Coastal Storm Damage Reduction Program has been in place for many, many decades. This is not an uncommon type of project on the East Coast. It's been happening for years and years with the support of the federal government along the Eastern Seaboard and in the Great Lakes. And it's only now starting to become more commonplace on the West Coast with sea level rise, more frequency and more severe storms and tidal influences. So I just wanted to state that at the outset that it's a program that is a long time coming to the West Coast. The objective of these projects is to reduce storm damages to critical public infrastructure as well as private property in some instances, and to protect the shoreline from erosion. It's also to provide an alternative to hard structures along the coast, a soft solution, if you will, to shoreline protection and coastal storm damage reduction. It's also to increase public safety by reducing public safety risks from bluff failures caused by wave action against bluffs, at least in the situation of our project, both Encinitas and Solana Beach. And it also reduces the narrowing of the coastal shoreline and provides for both vertical and lateral access to the coastline. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this project has been in the works for quite some time. Feasibility was initiated in 2001. The release of the EIR and EIS occurred in 2005. Quite a bit of work was done in 2011 to 2012. We worked with the resource agencies and coordinated with them, and then presented to the Coastal Commission in July of 2013. Suggested or recommended revisions to the project were made, and that was brought back to the commission later that year. Congressional authorization occurred in 2016, and we are here today in the middle of pre-construction engineering and design, otherwise known as PED, and we're looking to complete that phase of the project in fall of 2023. Next slide, sorry. So this is an overview of the project or study area, and as you can see, it starts up at the north there at Panisquitos Lagoon and extends past the San Alejo Lagoon down into Solana Beach. We studied that area for quite some time as part of the project. Next slide. This is an overview of the project that is currently being designed for the city of Solana Beach. The beach width would be extended an additional 150 feet. The initial volume of initial construction of sand would be 700,000 cubic yards. The total miles of coastline restored would be 1.36 miles or 7,200 feet. And the future nourishment cycles, which are projected to occur roughly every 10 years, would be 290,000 cubic yards. In the city of Encinitas, the beach width would be 50 feet. The initial volume for initial construction would be 340,000 cubic yards. The extent of the coastline to be restored would be 1.47 miles or 7,800 linear feet. And future periodic nourishment in the order of 5 to 10 years would be 220,000 cubic yards of sand. Next slide, please. So this shows a high-level view of the two receiver sites as well as the borrow site in yellow. Next slide. For gauging order of magnitude, this is the beach fill for Solana Beach, and what's shown here in the orange color is this proposed project, and what's shown is the yellow is the regional beach sand 1 and 2 receiver area. So you can see it's quite a bit larger. The yellow area extending south from Fletcher Cove, and the orange area for this project would extend from Tide Park Beach all the way down to the southern border with the city of Del Mar. Next slide. And this is showing the same image for the city of Encinitas, again showing the project area for this project in orange, and the RBSB 1 and RBSB 2 approved sites for restoration in yellow. Next slide. So obviously the project is intended to provide important public access and life safety benefits, creates a new public beach, approximately 34 new acres of beach, increased public safety along the public shoreline, and protects coastal access both to and along the beach. Next slide. This is not an uncommon condition in the city of Solana Beach primarily during winter seasons, where we have high storm, high tide events, where virtually the entire beach is taken up by a wave attack, and our bluffs are subject to that wave attack. The same is true in portions of the city of Encinitas. Next slide. So the project need is primarily to address a long deficiency of sediment to and along the beach. Sediment supply to the beach is blocked by inland development, construction of roads such as Interstate 5 and Highway 101. Other coastal structures such as harbors and jetties can prevent the longshore transport of sediment along the coast. And in our 2 cities, coastal erosion has occurred steadily throughout the years, creating this eroding shoreline. We've had several bluff failures, and that'll show you in another slide coming up. The California Regional Sediment Management Plan had identified Solana Beach and Encinitas as areas of concern. Beach replenishment is a preferred option, a soft solution, if you will, to storm damage reduction and shoreline restoration, and also to future sea level rise, rather than hard shoreline structures. And without this beach nourishment, the potential for hard shoreline armoring would increase. Next slide, please. This just shows you some of the incidents of bluff failures in the cities of Encinitas and Solana Beach. There on the left is Solana Beach, on the right Encinitas. Obviously creates hazard to public safety, as was alluded to earlier in this meeting. There has been a tragic loss of life in a recent incident up in Encinitas, and those are some of the things we're trying to obviously prevent with these projects. Next slide. Here's an image that, again, is not an unfamiliar sight along the bluffs of both the cities of Solana Beach and Encinitas. One more slide to show you and there's a good image of what might be called wave attack of the bluff that can destabilize the bluffs, both the lower bluffs and the upper bluffs, which can lead to failures. Next slide, sorry. These are some images of, on the right, obviously, the Fletcher Cove Community Center. There are public facilities throughout both cities that are at risk of loss due to this bluff failures. Private properties as well at risk of loss. And next slide. This shows you, I won't read all of this, but as part of the project, an analysis was done to identify the existing structures, public infrastructure, public beaches, and critical infrastructure that would be subject to loss without the benefits of this project. Next slide. This is a rather stark image of what shoreline armoring can sometimes look like, and the objective here is to promote and encourage a soft or a shoreline replenishment option rather than a hard armoring of the coastline. Next slide, please. The project also is intended to improve coastal resiliency, to be resilient to sea level rise over a 50-year lifespan for this project. Various sea level rise scenarios were evaluated in the EIR-EIS using the sea level rise scenarios that recommended by the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission sea level rise policy guidance recognizes beach nourishment as the preferred sea level rise adaptation strategy. And there you have some quotes from that policy and guidance that this project is intended to provide, namely to encourage natural shoreline processes and green infrastructure, living shorelines, and to avoid the perpetuation of shoreline armoring. And as I've already stated, require a soft or living shoreline, such as beach nourishment, to other protective devices along the coast. Next slide. There were several alternatives analyzed in the EIR-EIS. There was a comprehensive analysis of those alternatives. The initial evaluation of structural and non-structural solutions. Hard structures were evaluated, including seawalls, breakwaters, revetments. Those were dropped from consideration after the initial analysis. The final array of alternatives, the no action alternative, that might require more emergency hard shoreline protective structures in the future. Beach nourishment at widths ranging from 50 to 200 feet. Beach nourishment at various widths plus notch infills along the bluffs. The beach nourishment best met the objectives of both cities. Next slide, please. During the first Coastal Commission review, there was modifications to address comments from the Coastal Commission as well as stakeholders that were a part of the project review. The reduction of sand volumes in both cities occurred as a result of those recommendations. The beach width for the city of Encinitas reduced from 100 feet to 50 feet. For Solana Beach, the beach width reduced from 200 feet to 150 feet. Next slide. And the volumes of sediment were also reduced from 680,000 at initial placement in Encinitas to 340,000, and from 960,000 for initial placement to 700,000 for the city of Solana Beach. As you can see there, the renourishment cycles would provide 220,000 and 290,000 for the cities of Encinitas and Solana Beach, respectively. And then the renourishment cycles for Encinitas would be 5 years, and for Solana Beach, up to a 10-year renourishment cycle. And there you see the total placement of sand volume for the city of Encinitas, which would be 2.3 million cubic yards, and for Solana Beach, close to 1.9 million cubic yards. Next slide. Other project revisions that were recommended and requested by the Coastal Commission were primarily for areas of resource protection, habitat protection. Field work at Moonlight Beach to determine the extent of the cultural resources was requested by state parks. Monitoring requested by the Los Panisquitos Lagoon Foundation. Surf monitoring requested by Surfrider. Additional avoidance measures and protections for least tern snowy plovers, grunion, and green sea turtles requested by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and revisions as part of the project are being implemented in addition to other prior environmental commitments. Quite a few environmental commitments have been made. Going to the next slide. I won't read all of this, not to imply that these are not hugely important. We have been engaged with resource agencies. As recently as last week, we had a meeting with the project team and resource agencies on our required monitoring programs. But as you can see there, these are one of the list of 13 environmental commitments made by the project or on behalf of the project: habitat monitoring, biological mitigation and monitoring plan, as we mentioned, grunion monitoring and avoidance, snowy plover avoidance, cultural resources, shoreline monitoring, water quality monitoring. Next slide, please. Surf monitoring, stormwater pollution prevention, oil spill prevention and response plan, borrow site monitoring plan, a safety plan, and a staging plan. Next slide. Already shown this slide, but again, just wanted to give you an idea of where we are in the process. We are in the PED phase of the project, looking to complete the PED in the fall of 2023. So we're well underway with that effort, and anticipated project start date would be in the fall, excuse me, fall or winter of 2023. Next slide. If you don't mind, I'll go straight into 7B on the agenda, and that is a request for beach sand mitigation funds from the city of Solana Beach. As was discussed earlier, there are sand mitigation funds that are held by Sandag on behalf of the Coastal Commission through an MOA, and we are requesting those funds to help provide for initial construction of the project. Next slide. So we're requesting the full allocation of the funds that we have currently being held by Sandag. The fund was established in 1996, as I mentioned, by an MOA with the Coastal Commission and Sandag. Sandag holds the mitigation funds in trust for the cities. The source of the funds are from sand mitigation fees that are assessed by the Coastal Commission for shoreline protection projects. And the funds must be used to put sand on the beach, which is the priority number one for the use of those funds. The funded projects must be consistent with the Sandag's 1991 shoreline preservation strategy. Next slide. Currently, this Sandag is holding approximately $740,000 of these sand mitigation funds on behalf of Solana Beach. We are hoping to use all these funds for our local share contribution to this federal project. So we're making that request now of you. The project, as mentioned, is anticipated to begin in the fall of 2023 or winter of 2023-2024. The cost to the local cities, the non-federal sponsors for this project, is probably on the higher side of that estimate, $2 million. Next slide. And as I mentioned already, we're looking at construction in the fall or winter of 2023, project to be bundled with the San Clemente project. We are utilizing the Portland District hopper dredge, which is a very major cost saving for the project. And we will attempt to sink future renourishment cycles so that we can make use of that dredge as well. Next slide. This top item here is a little bit outdated. The initial construction cost is now over $40 million. That $31 million is outdated. We have a federal cost sharing requirement, 65% borne by the federal government, 35% by the non-federal or local sponsors, that being the cities of Encinitas and Solana Beach. The non-federal entities can also include state parks. So our local share for both PED and other project costs, as well as initial construction, we've been a very grateful partner with the state for funding our local, a large chunk of our local share, and that is also the case with this project. And those funds, the Public Beach Restoration Fund at the state, has a 85%, 15% cost share requirement, and that 15% is the roughly $2 million or so that the cities of Encinitas and Solana Beach will have to contribute for initial construction. Next slide. That concludes the presentation. I do want to mention that we, in addition to Leslie Meyerhoff, who's been working with the City of Solana Beach on this project since its inception. Thank you, Leslie. And we also have project team members on the call from the Army Corps of Engineers, Susie Ming and Larry Smith. We have representatives from Merkel Associates, our environmental consultants, as well as state parks and Coastal Frontiers, our other partner. Did I miss anybody? And I'd also like to thank Courtney and Keith for their coordination with us. Thank you very much for your support in getting this to this working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And before we go into questions, let me ask, is the PowerPoint available for those of us who might want to get a copy of it?
Yes, it will be made available.
There was a lot of good information in there.
Yes,
All right.
Chair, it will be made available after this meeting.
All right, thank you. I'm sure people have lots of questions, so let's do this first. We'll see if working group members have questions, and we'll get those answered. Then we'll see if there are people on the public line that want to ask a question or make a comment, and then we'll come back and have working group discussion, and then we will have a vote on this. So let's start with questions. Mr. Sankey.
Yeah, I'll go with a question, I think. I do have some comments for later, and I believe I'm supportive of the project. It's quite a full court press here. We've talked earlier in the meeting about regional approaches to these kind of things, and looking at your timeline, you started this in 2005, and so the earlier question about how soon we can get RSB3 going makes me a little nervous seeing that timeline. But the approach that we've talked about in two different budget items today, or agenda items today, has been about regional cooperation. In this instance, you guys have spent a lot of homework and a lot of time to get this thing ready. And again, I'm supportive of it. But the consequence of this going forward would mean that when we do get around to RSP3, the placement of sand will likely be affected by this particular project. In fact, you would not, in my estimation, although I won't be part of the decision making, would get less because you already got your share. If I'm phrasing that poorly, I apologize. But you've clearly created the need. But how have you guys looked internally about the regional approach to the sand mitigation issues, as well as getting what's done necessarily needs to get done for Solana Beach and Encinitas in the shorter term?
Thank you for the question. And by the way, I neglected to mention that Liam Maxwell with the City of Encinitas is also on the call if there's any questions specifically of Encinitas. Yes, so we have been approached and met with the SandAg staff about the Regional Beach Sand Project 3. Our position at this point, and I don't want to get out in front of council, but our position at this point is we are a regional partner in sediment management, and we are interested in being at the table for at least that initial phase, the feasibility and study. We recognize that this project is a long-term project that should we carry it to fruition, might change our city's view in terms of need, as well as what phases we participate in beyond that. So while we want to have a seat at the table and are willing to provide financial support for that initial phase, we haven't decided beyond that whether or not this is going to be a project that we will continue on with, given this 50-year Army Corps project. Now, I will say that these projects do take a long time just because you get funding at the federal level for initial construction. And by the way, thanks to Representative Mike Levin, we do have funding secured from the federal level for initial construction, and we're looking good at the state budget for our grant from the state for initial construction. That being said, there's no guarantee that renourishment cycles will then get funded by the federal government. So we want to keep our options open. And while I don't anticipate it would be a 10-year horizon for initiation of Beach Sand Project 3 to construction, there may be some value in still pursuing and looking at that as an option rather than continue to see what happens with the federal project. These are all questions it's hard to predict, but I will say that initially the city of Solana Beach wants to be at the table and be a partner in the regional effort to study another project, not just because of the benefits it may provide to the city, but also understanding that the region and this littoral cell that we belong to can be impacted by what other cities in the area would like to do.
So that's a very fair assessment. Thank you, Greg. And you mentioned the word prediction in your answer to the question, which leads me to my second and final question, I promise. The idea to make the project smaller, and it was initiated apparently by Coastal Commission comments. It's given the changing projections and predictions for sea level rise that seemingly get bigger every time another study comes out. Is it short-sighted to, I mean, I personally feel it might be short-sighted to have made the project smaller. If you're going to go to all the effort to get the Portland dredge down here, you're going to do the project, you're going to do your thing. Tell me the thinking about making the project smaller.
And I may have to defer to Leslie on this. I personally wasn't with the city of Solana Beach during those discussions, but what I do know is that primarily by virtue of potential impacts to habitat, whether it be eelgrass habitat, reef habitat, biological impacts. I think that was the primary driver in reducing the quantities of sand. So I don't know that it necessarily was tied to the sea level rise adaptation.
The resilience issue. Okay.
The resilience issue. That's my recollection. And at this point, it'd be hard to make a change to the project, quite honestly.
Understand completely. No, I'm not saying change it. It just seemed, I just want to know the thinking behind it, and I appreciate it. Humans are a species too. Thank you.
All right, a momentary diversion. There's about 10 minutes left before we are scheduled to adjourn. My suggestion is let's push agenda item 6 to our next meeting, unless Keith or somebody tells me it's essential we do it today. And let's spend the rest of the time on this so that we can get to a vote on it and get people's questions answered. So let's go ahead with questions, recognizing that we only have about 10 minutes left. Who else would like to ask a question about this at this point from the working group? Not seeing any. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Thanks for the informative presentation. I don't know if it was mentioned, but speaking on behalf of Surfrider, glad to see that the surf monitoring is a part of this. I read recently somewhere that there has a contract has been awarded for the surf monitoring, that it is going to go start at least a year before and go for at least 2 years after. So really thankful for that on behalf of all the surfers of Solana Beach and Encinitas. Also, it looks like this project, if Sandag releases the funds, Solana Beach's mitigation funds will go back to zero, which is a little concerning, but obviously I think Surfrider, we just want to make sure that you guys are getting your funds back for the next thing that we need to do. And so there are a lot of seawall permits that are either expired or reaching the end of their permit through the Coastal Commission. So one thing that we would really like to see is that the city of Solana Beach work with the Coastal Commission to really assess all those permits, the expired permits and the ones that are soon to expire, and just make sure that these fees that the property owners are paying are reassessed. They really need to be re-upped to higher fees so that you can get more money in this bank. And we would ask that as a condition of Sandag releasing these funds, that would be a requirement to kind of get an inventory of the current fees, the permits, and the fees that are required of them, and just make sure that they're reassessed, because I think, usually the permits are mostly 20 or 30-year permits. So it's time to re-up them and just get you guys more money into your fund so you can do more projects in the future and get those matches and things like that. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. And I see Mr. Wade is nodding. He's heard your suggestion. Other questions from the working group? If not, I'm going to go to, I suspect, yes, Mr. LaCava.
Mr. Chair, just one real quick question since I'm relatively new to this group. The question today is only about releasing funds, your funds, for this project. Has the working group or Sandag taken any position on the project itself? Or it doesn't actually come in front of Sandag?
Good question. Mr. Greer.
So the project is in full support of the policies for shoreline preservation and nourishment that Sandag has in place. We have talked about this project for the last, I would say, 15 years. So what doesn't go to the board, what's going to the board is the release of the actual funds, but the project itself is in complete consistent with the policies in place.
All right, thank you for that. Then, Amelia, do we have some people on the line who wanted to comment or ask a question? I know we have some powerhouse people on the line for the project?
Yes, we have hands raised, and we have 5 speakers, starting with Mike Hastings, then Julia Shang, following Lynn Gibson, Terry Gasterlund, and Council Member David Zito.
All right, let's try to get through as many of these as we can. And Mike Hastings, you're up. If you could be brief, we would appreciate it, but go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I will in the essence of time. First and foremost, thank you for this opportunity to speak, but I strongly urge this group, any decision made now and moving forward, condition it on 2 aspects. One is to improve the current monitoring program at Torrey Pines and actually incorporate the additional transects and methods that we have implemented with coastal environments to really identify how sand moves and characterize its impacts on the lagoon. The current transects are located south of the inlet now and don't tell this story. So it's important that part of the puzzle be put in place if it truly is monitoring for monitoring's sake and getting good information. And 2 is I strongly encourage a condition be set that mitigation funding be set aside prior to sand being placed on any of this beach. We have multiple lines of evidence that have shown this sand not only comes down the coast, but greatly impacts lagoons such as Los Panisquitos Lagoon, involving multiple times of opening the inlet. I only have funding for 1 time. If it has to be open multiple times, it simply will not happen. The repercussions for that is we have about 100 or 200 acres of tidal wetland, ESHA, if you will, that will be greatly impacted and submerged due to daily inputs of fresh water. City of San Diego is investing $65 million in a salt marsh restoration first phase. That's currently in 60% design. That project will not meet its success criteria if we don't have tidal influence. And last but not least, the public issue of West Nile virus and Culex tarsalis that breeds in our lagoon and can have devastating impacts to local communities within a 2-mile radius when inlet is closed, and breeding basically turns in about 300 to 400 acres. I have more to talk about, but out of respect to the other folks that want to speak, I'll leave it at that. But I do urge this working group to implement those 2 conditions moving forward, so we can work with this group to make sure that it gets sand on the beach, but it doesn't impact down coastal estuaries such as Los Panisquitos Lagoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I see Ms. Meyerhoff's pen is moving in a determined fashion as you were speaking. Amelia, who's the next speaker?
Julia Shang here.
Julia Chun here. Julia, you're on. Welcome.
All right, thanks. I'll try to make this brief. I would like to touch on the fact that I do believe it's a better project after engagements from Surfrider and others back in 2012. Initially, the project was supposed to cover the reefs in 1 foot or 2 of sand at the 2-year equilibrium point. So bringing it back actually had some great benefits to habitat and recreation. Since these funds are coming from a fund that's supposed to mitigate erosion and recreation, I wanted to add the caveat to consider improving recreation with some experimentation with sand placement. There's a professor out of University of North Florida, Bill Daly. He has a paper on sculpting beach nourishment to improve surfing with some mounds that can be placed that are ephemeral. I remember one of the selling points of this project is that it's adaptive. So maybe at the 5 and 10-year points where we re-nourish, we can look at that for improving the recreation that we're mitigating for. So other than that, thank you for the update, and thanks so much for letting me talk.
Thank you, Julia. We are at the time hour. Is there anybody here that can't stay another 10, maybe 15 minutes at the most? I would very much like to get us.
I can stay maybe like 5 extra minutes. I have a time certain.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. We've got a number of speakers, and it's timely. We need to vote on this today if we can, right, Keith?
That's correct, in order to meet the fall deadline that they have for Solana Beach to start the project.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's ask the speakers on the line. I hate to cut off public comment. Let's ask you to go ahead. And if you can hold yourselves to 1 minute each, we'll hopefully have a shot to make it before we lose a quorum. So who's next, Amelia?
Lynn Gibson, go ahead.
You're on.
Sorry, it takes a minute for the unmute to come on. Hi, I'm Lynn Gilson, And I'm a resident of Northern Encinitas, and I really wanted to make sure that people understood that not all of Encinitas is covered in the Encinitas Solana Beach project. That in fact, places like Grandview are not covered, where we had, of course, the catastrophic deaths. And to Mr. Wade's slide that includes protection of, say, the Sea Bluff stairwell, that's not actually included either. You know, his slide that says, yeah, Daphne Street South, that's for the rest of us kind of Beacons Beach South. And a quick comment / question about the issue of combining the dredging, using the dredge for both projects, the RBSP and the Army Corps. My understanding was that the Army Corps project was shrunk for environmental regions, that you really can't dredge all of the coastline or put sand on all of the coastline at the same time.
All righty, thank you for the input. Again, the pens are moving, so we're making a note of it. And who is next?
Terry Gasterlund is next.
Welcome, Terry, you're on.
All right, there's that mute button. I'll be brief. There are 3 things that I'd like to get on our list to pay attention to. So the first one is being sure that the Del Mar offshore sand is not going to have a negative effect on Del Mar beaches, at least no more cumulative negative effect than might be transient, and then the sand that goes onto Solana Beach and Encinitas comes back. Let's make sure the geotech, the science, and the engineering are clear and tell us definitively that we won't hurt Del Mar's beaches. 2, Del Mar bluff failures, great slide, City Manager Wade. I'd like to be able to recreate that slide for Del Mar, so I'll consult you about that. 3, this is a great opportunity for improving the shoreline monitoring and tracking the movement of the sand. I encourage collaborating with Scripps researchers, particularly perhaps contact Falk Feddersen, so that we can track movement of the sand and understand whether placement of some of it further north is going to help Solana Beach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. Velia, anybody else on the line?
Yes, Council Member David Cito. Go ahead.
David, you're on. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'll be quick. Thanks for the consideration. Truly appreciate this body taking a look at this, and also very much appreciate the regional projects we've had in the past. One of the great things about the regional projects that we had in the past, and continue to look at the ones going forward, is we have learned a lot about the sand and the sand placement and what works and what doesn't. And the great news for at least this particular area of our coastline is that it's been shown that Solana Beach, particularly with the right kind of sand, is able to quickly and easily retain a lot of it for many, many years. So these projects are very effective for this particular part of our coastline. I also want to reiterate, this is another opportunity and one of the first opportunities to actually execute an adaptive shoreline protection program that's helped run by the Army Corps of Engineers in this particular part of the country. And so this is a good opportunity for us to collaborate with the federal agencies and get them more involved, and hopefully deploy more resources to us as we have to deal with shoreline erosion and water rise over time. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Zito. Anybody else on the line? Amelia?
Yes, Ross Timmerman.
Ross, you're on. 1 minute, please.
Hi, briefly, I just wanted to point out in terms of the coastal monitoring, the Coastal Data Information Program at Scripps Institution of Oceanography deployed a new wave buoy off of Beacons State Beach on Tuesday. So that data is available at cdip.ucsd.edu, and it's freely available to the public. And there are several other wave buoy stations up and down the coast to help with your monitoring effort. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that valuable input. Anybody else, Amelia?
Yes, Carol is on the line.
Go ahead, Carol. 1 minute, please.
There we go. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I know you're in a short time frame. Just had two questions. One question and a thank you for the surf monitoring because I'm from Oceanside and we did lose 2 beach breaks during that last deposit back in 2012. So very thankful to have the surf monitoring. So the question, I noticed that this new project would be in fall, winter 2023. Can someone answer why that time was chosen when winter is usually our worst time to lose sand and erosion during those winter storms? Thank you for letting me comment.
Thank you for your input. And let me just hold the question. I really want to try to get us to a vote before we lose a quorum. And I'm watching Dr. Bhat Patel to see if she's going to get up. Amelia, anybody else on the line?
No more hands on the.
All right, then let me make a suggestion, which I don't normally do, which is that we entertain a motion to approve and ask the staff to evaluate all the comments and suggestions that were made and pass all of that up the ladder. It's not really our decision to do this. It might be tempting to make a motion to approve and start attaching conditions, but we'll never get out of here if we try that. So that's my suggestion, but it's only a suggestion. Mr. Sandke.
Mr. Chair, I recognize your suggestion as probably important, and I noticed the pen working. I will make a motion to approve the item, and it's not our ability actually to add conditions to the project at this point. So as much as the public comments are important, we simply don't have that ability. So I make the motion to approve the recommendation.
All right, is there a second for the motion?
I'll second motion. I'm happy to do that in the spirit of teamwork, but as we go forward, realize I hope when this project fixes some of the issues in Solana Beach, that when we go to RBSP3, we have that same mentality of teamwork when other cities need that as well, because I'm concerned that we support this and I'm very supportive of it, but I hope that's reciprocated when we have needs up and down the coast afterwards. And I know that's more of a comment directed towards council, but thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Let's see if we quickly have any discussion. And I think even if we lose a quorum, those of you who want to stay, you can, or people on the line, and we can continue talking about this, but we need to get the vote done. Anybody want to say anything on the motion on the floor? I would just reiterate my suggestion that we ask the staff to evaluate the recommendations that were made and pass up their comments on all of that along with the motion. And with that, let's have a call for the question. And if you're in support, just raise your hand. Anybody opposed? It looks like unanimous approval. So thank you all for that. And Dr. Bhat Patel, if you need to go, thank you for coming. And we no longer have a quorum.
Chair, just to clarify, I think the Navy is abstained. One abstention.
One abstention, okay, by the Navy. All right, then we still have a quorum while she's in the room. Anything else we need to do, Keith, while we have a quorum?
No, just to close it out and talk about the next meeting.
All right, why don't you let us know when is the next meeting?
Courtney, why don't you speak up?
All right, thank you all, and thank you to everybody who's on the phone and for your comments, and I apologize that we had to cut you a bit short. Normally we would have more dialogue, but we now have lost a quorum, so I think under the Brown Act, we're constrained to just adjourn. That's all we can do. So thanks, everybody.
You still have quorum, but.
Oh, we do? We still have a quorum?
You're at the end of the agenda today, man.
All right, if we still have a quorum, then if anybody else wanted to say anything else, let's give you a shot. Yes.
I would just like to thank City Manager Wade for working with your whole team to bring this forward in a way that's responsive to a lot of the concerns that I've heard today, and I'm sure you've heard over time, especially the additional mitigation and the monitoring. Thank you so much.
Anybody else on the working group? Anybody else on the line, Amelia, that wanted to make a comment on anything before we close it down?
So our next working group is going to be on Thursday, December 1st, another first. It'll also be at 11:30. More details to come on if it'll be hybrid, virtual, or in person fully.
All right, we are adjourned, and thank you all for coming, and thank you to the staff and to everybody who's on the line helping us with this important subject matter.
For the record, there were no hands raised on the last item. Thank you.